Welcome to the 1 Million Years of Joy podcast. I'm Dr. Andrea Benaker, your host, and my intention is to inspire you to find more joy in your life through the stories from our guests and the science on joy and purpose. Nora, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's such a pleasure. Nora, I've been admiring your work, and you're such a phenomenal writer that I wanted to start with the first question, where hopefully I'd like to invite you to share a pivotal moment in your life that significantly impacted your decision to become a writer and an editor.
Wow, that's a very interesting question. I don't think there was a specific moment in my life when I decided to become a writer. I always knew I was a writer. Even when I was 5 years old, if someone asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I did say a writer. So I think that's something I've always been. I came to be an editor sort of by default because of the journal that I created and edit, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. And I find that I love editing. I find it very, very interesting. So I'm very happy to be able to do that now.
Wonderful. And it must be so fulfilling for you to be on a path doing what you love doing and that you've loved doing since you're 5 years old. I just find that so beautiful.
I feel so fortunate. There are so many people in life, and we meet them every day, who wish they were doing something else and wish they'd had another life. And I feel really blessed. I know how lucky I am to be doing exactly what I want, and I know how rare it is too.
And I think ultimately it transposes in the beauty of your work. I know one of your most recent books, In Sickness and in Health, Yom Kippur in a Gym. Could you share with us what inspired you to write this book and tell us about the process that you go through when writing a new book?
This is a book of two novellas. The first one, In Sickness and in Health, is about a woman named Lily who's been suffering for 3 years from a mysterious illness that no one can diagnose. And she's seen all these doctors. No one can solve what it is. But also, when she was a child, she had epilepsy. So her most cherished goal has always been to be normal, so-called. And by age 45, she has a normal life, including a family and friends and an artistic career. And no one knows the truth about her medical past. But now some cartoons she drew threaten to reveal the secret and destroy her marriage and everything else she's worked so hard for. So the other one, and I'm giving a little background to them so you can understand what inspired them. Yom Kippur in a Gym is about 5 strangers in a gym during the last hour of a Yom Kippur service. And Yom Kippur is the holiest day in the Jewish year. And each of these people is struggling with a different personal crisis. So Lucy can't accept that her husband has Parkinson's disease. Ira, who's been rejected by his lover, is planning suicide. Rachel worries about losing her job. Ezra is tormented by a mistake that he thinks ruined his career. And Tom is contemplating severing all contact with his sisters. And then a medical emergency happens and unexpectedly throws them together. And in that hour, all their lives are changed in ways that they would never have believed possible. So In Sickness and in Health was inspired partly because I'm a feminist who cares very much about women's health and women's health issues. Quite a few people have asked me why I wrote a novella about sickness. And I tell them that this novella is not only about sickness. In many ways, it's not about sickness. It's really about, as the title indicates, it's also about health. It's about women's strength and creativity and resilience, the relationship between mind and body, the myth of normalcy, the experience of being different from the people around you, the long-term effects of stigma, and the power of love. And Lily, in this book, even though none of the doctors can diagnose what she has, all of these male doctors treat her with contempt as if her problems are psychosomatic or they're normal for a woman her age. So the sexism and ageism in the medical profession combined to work against Lily. And this, unfortunately, is not an uncommon experience for many women. And I'm very interested in these issues. And I think it's important for women to write about the specific experiences and issues that affect us as women. So that was part, at least, of what inspired that novella. For Yom Kippur in a gym, I actually was in a gym for Yom Kippur for many years, surrounded by hundreds, sometimes over 1,000 people I didn't know. And one year I looked around at all the people, most of whom, I mean, complete strangers, and I wondered who they were and what they were really thinking about. You know, this is a crucial moment in the year when you're soul searching what you did right last year and how you want to be better next year. But people, what are they really thinking about? Are they thinking about money or their health or a fight with their partner? And it made me want to write about that. So that setting and that moment, in a way, gave birth to this novella. And that's very interesting for me because that's never happened to me before, that a setting actually inspired something that I wrote. Um, as for the process I go through when writing a new book, I find writing fiction very different from writing nonfiction, which, of course, as I did when I was an academic, I'm a former professor. Nonfiction writing for me is mainly intellectual and a cerebral process, but writing fiction places different demands on me. It's intellectual, but it's also emotional and spiritual. It's really the most demanding work I've ever done. In retrospect, if I compare it to writing academic work, this is so much harder. But at the same time, it's much more rewarding and exciting for me, and it's when I feel most alive. Writing for me is also a slow process. And I think partly, at least, that's because writing fiction involves an unconscious process. You know, the editing process, and your question before about me as an editor, all of that, of course, is very conscious and intellectual. But the core of writing fiction is really your own human experience. It's everything that you have ever felt and seen and wondered about and hoped for. And when you're writing fiction, and when it's really going well, it just flows out of you. You don't really even know where it's coming from. Like sometimes I'll write something, and then after a few hours, I'll go back and look at it and I'll say, oh, so that's what I'm thinking about now. Like I really didn't know when I was writing what I was writing in a way. So, you know, you can say, for instance, I'm going to set this story in a canyon in 1980, and there'll be two girls in the story, but the rest is up for grabs until it's written, which is why it takes a really long time, at least for me, to write a novel or a novella or a really good story. You can't just turn it on like turning on a tap. The way I think of it is that the story has to simmer inside you like a good soup, you know, until it's fully cooked and all the extraneous elements have been boiled off.
Very, very interesting. And when you say it takes a long time, give us a sense. Are we talking months, years?
Well, my novella, my first novel, Fields of Exile, took 7 years. My second one took about 6 years. The novellas probably took a year and a half to 2 years apiece. Then again, in my first book, Marrow and Other Stories, I wrote the title story in an hour and a half. So, but I think I'm at a different stage now. I don't think I would ever write anything again quite that quickly.
I really love how you combine topics that interest you as well as lived experiences, if you wish,
Mhm,
because when you're sharing now that it can take multiple years to write
mhm.
a book, I can imagine the highs and the lows that you may be experiencing in your own life, right?
Absolutely.
Whereby you may feel at some point that you're accelerating, you're on the right path. And
Yeah.
I imagine that sometimes you may rethink twice about something that you have written. Have you gone back, or do you go back repeatedly in these years of writing a novel and rewrite and start over? Or is it just building blocks, and whatever has been written, whatever is on paper, you're satisfied with, and you keep adding and building
Mhm.
on that? I'm
Mhm.
just curious if you can
It's a
share
great
with us that
question.
process.
It's a great question. I mean, different writers write differently, but not long ago, someone said to me, she was complaining about the process of writing and how long it takes. And she said, I wrote four versions. I edited it four times and I laughed. It's countless. I don't know if it's 25, 45, 100. I mean, I just keep at it until it's right. And you make a good point because you're living for these 7 years. You're a real person. You change. Your perspective changes. In the sixth year, I looked at it and went, well, what's happening around me socially? That was a novel about anti Semitism on campuses, which was published 10 years ago. And it took 7 years to find a publisher. No one wanted to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Finally, someone did, thankfully. But at a certain point in writing it, I went, this isn't accurate anymore. This isn't what I'm trying to say anymore. I want to say something different. And then you have to go back and work that through in a deep way with the character and with the plot, the characters and the plot, and the language you use, higher language, so to speak, or more street language. It's a very complex art form. They all are. And it's so funny when people seem to think it's a simple thing. There's this joke where two people meet at a cocktail party, and the man says to her, what do you do? And she says, I'm a writer. And he says, oh, how wonderful. I'm a surgeon and I'm retiring next week and I'm going to write. And she said, how wonderful. I'm planning to retire next week and I'm going to be a surgeon. And, there's a tremendous lack of understanding of what goes into writing well. Some people say there's no such thing as good writing, there's just good editing. But in any case, coming up with a good book of fiction, a good work, that's a very, very big undertaking.
In that process of finding a publisher, where do you actually decide to expand on the storyline, on the plot, on, like, do you
Mhm.
see what I mean? Help us understand the whole process behind, and that we often do not see behind the scenes,
Yeah.
that relate to actually finding a publisher, and what influence do they have
Hmm.
had on you in terms of influencing the plot, the storyline, and so on.
Well, that's a very good question. There are some places I've been told, for example, in England, where to some extent the author is reigns supreme, and the editor at the publishing house just about never does anything. It's you wouldn't touch a work, especially of a famous author. In the United States, the general impression is, of course, there's certainly exceptions, but you know, your work is looked at as almost a first draft. The editor, feels free to rip it to shreds. And Canada has a bit of both. I only had an agent once and very briefly, but I once had an agent say that I'll take you on if you fundamentally redo the book. And her requirements were such that I said, no, that's not the same book. I'm not doing that. So it's a subtle sort of negotiation with the editor at your publishing house. I've generally been fortunate. I've heard horror stories from other people who basically cut out all the depth, all the nuance, and all the character development. And they just want basically a thriller almost. But I've had to push back. Of course, there are things that are important to me that the editor may not see or doesn't appreciate, or so it's a negotiation process, but often an interesting one. I mean, unless you're a very arrogant person who thinks everything that comes out of me is perfect, which is definitely not me. I learn and I benefit from feedback, which one must. But there are also some things that are a matter of principle, and you say, no, I'm not going to do that. And usually they back down if you feel that strongly about something.
Great. And if we now look at your readers, what do you hope your readers will walk away with from reading all your award winning books?
Well, I'm a writer, but as you know, I'm also a former social worker and social work professor. So, in addition to seeing my writing and literary fiction in general as having intrinsic value and great value, I also think stories can offer a way to help address human and social problems. In my view, fiction contains almost a kind of magic power because what happens when you read fiction is that your defenses drop. And once you decide to keep reading past the first few pages, even if the main character is an axe murderer, once you decide to keep reading, you let this person inside you. And once you've done this, you enter for a time this person's inner world and you see the world through this person's eyes. And that is what empathy is, experiencing the reality, complexity, and humanity of the other. So, this kind of writing, good fiction writing, introduces us in an intimate way to otherness and differentness, and therefore increases our capacity for empathy and tolerance. In fact, there's now a body of research showing clearly that when you read good fiction, it changes you emotionally and even neurologically. It increases your capacity for empathy, not only for people in the book, but for people in real life, which is amazing. It means that actually, in my opinion, that if every person on this planet read good fiction for an hour a day, we would have a different world. Fiction really changes people. And for instance, I've heard from quite a lot of readers from my novel Fields of Exile, the one about anti Semitism, that it led them to question their views about Jews and Israel and anti Semitism. And that was very gratifying for me. And I would be very happy. I would be joyful if all of my fiction could change how people think and feel.
You are also the founder and the editor of the online literary journal jewishfiction.net, which has published nearly 600 works of fiction and has readers in over 140 countries, which I really find amazing. What has been the most fulfilling aspect for you since the inception of jewishfiction.net?
Well, what's been most fulfilling for me is knowing that I'm providing a place for stories that without this journal might never have been published and would have been lost to the world. You know, I started this journal because when digital publishing began, publishers were in a crisis. It sounds funny now because digital publishing is so normal for us, but it actually was an earthquake for the publishing industry. And since publishers saw Jewish fiction as a niche fiction, writers of Jewish themed fiction suddenly had a terrible time finding a home for their work. And I was really afraid about all this work that was going to get lost. Nowadays, with anti Semitism skyrocketing worldwide, I've heard from many writers who are writing Jewish themed fiction that they're being shut out of literary journals and venues and publishers that even a year ago would have welcomed their writing. So jewishfiction.net provides a place and a home for both writers and readers of Jewish themed fiction where they can meet. And by the way, these stories are not just for Jewish readers and writers. We've published non Jewish authors and we have many non Jewish readers. So this journal is for everyone. People of all backgrounds can read and enjoy these stories, the same as I enjoy reading Italian, Cuban, Vietnamese stories. I read everything. We published first rate Jewish fiction from around the world that was originally written in English or translated into English from 21 languages. And out of the 600 works almost that we've published that were never before published in English, a third of these are translations. So we really are a multicultural journal. And we're now in an important transition point. We're creating a new website to make it much more interactive. So soon people are going to be able to search our archive and find a Hanukkah story and a bar mitzvah story or a story translated from Russian, Albanian, all 21 languages. So it's very exciting. And you can check us out for free at www.jewishfiction.
How beautiful that you're allowing individuals to leave a legacy that would have potentially been forgotten if their
Absolutely.
works would have not been published. So,
Exactly. You
so
understand
incredible.
perfectly.
Can you share with us a story of one of the authors whom was overjoyed by the opportunity to have their work published in jewishfiction.net?
Well, I don't want to mention names because the story is really about the desperation of not being able to get published. I mean, that's what underlies the story. But someone I know who was a very good writer, I knew personally, and one day we were having a coffee and she was almost in tears, and she had been told repeatedly that she'd just been rejected repeatedly, which is normal. I've been rejected more times than I can count. We all have. But this was at that pivotal moment in the early 2000s. And after being rejected by the publisher that she thought was most likely to accept her, she reached the conclusion that she would stop writing. He had actually, this publisher had said to her, just put your novel in a drawer and come back in 10 years when all this has settled down. Well, digital publishing has not, quote, settled down. It's never going to settle down and go away. We're never going to go back to the world before that. And she basically stopped writing. And I was so horrified. And it's no small thing to start a journal. And I'm not, well, I'm fairly technically accomplished now, but I certainly wasn't when I started. I had no idea what would be involved. Perhaps if I'd known, I wouldn't have done it, but of course I'm glad I did. But when I told her I was going to do this, and I didn't say for her, I mean, as a matter of dignity, I wasn't going to embarrass her, but I said, oh, I think this would be such a good idea. And I'd love to have an excerpt from your novel, the unpublished novel. We publish stories and novel excerpts, both forms of prose fiction. And she burst into tears. She said, maybe I'll keep writing. And to this day, she's kept writing. And she said that for her, that was a turning point. We've also, helped to launch a lot of careers. We've published a lot of authors for the first time. And I get a lot of love letters of appreciation, I must say, which is, one of the joys of doing this kind of work.
I absolutely love the story that you have shared and what inspired you. And this brings me to the topic of joy and
Mm-hmm.
also success.
Mm-hmm.
What is your definition of joy and what is your definition of success?
Oh, those are two wonderful and very important concepts. I think joy comes when you are aligned with yourself, when you're doing what you or your soul loves to do. In the Song of Songs, there's this line, there's a question: have you seen him whom my soul loves? And for me, what my soul loves is writing, is creating. Of course, I also experience joy at many other times when I'm with people I love. I have a grandson, he fills me with joy. Or nature, music. I also think there's a lot of joy in giving to other people, to contributing, to making a difference in the world, and being part of something greater than yourself. About success, I think success is a really big issue for a lot of people. We tend to evaluate ourselves in terms of external definitions of success. You look around, you compare yourself to others in your field or your community, and you say, oh, wow, this woman's ahead of me, or this guy is behind me. And that's how you situate yourself and your place in the world. But this is very problematic, and this was expressed in a great infographic that I came across not that long ago, and I shared on LinkedIn. The infographic had at the top a picture and the words, how people often measure success, job title, and salary. And then underneath it, how success should be measured: a right fit, work life balance, purpose, happiness, and authenticity. And this really resonated with me because I gave up a tenured university position in order to write fiction full time. So obviously, I'm not extremely motivated by job title or money. For me, I would say success means the freedom to do what I want with my time and with my life, having the independence to invest my energy into work that's meaningful to me and intrinsically and creatively rewarding, and that contributes to the world somehow. I mean, external rewards and recognition are, of course, very nice. I certainly am proud of the awards I've won for my books and for my academic work. and I've received honors for my community work and activism. But these are really not what drive me. For me, it's having meaningful and engaging work and the opportunity to share it with others, like I'm sharing it with you and your listeners today. I think it's really important to know your own values, to know yourself and your values, and to question the prevailing narrative, all the social norms about what constitutes success. And once you know your own values, what you really value, and you measure yourself against that, instead of the superficial success yardstick that many people use, I was going to say against themselves in a way, then you're much more happy, you're much more joyful. And I think you're also more creative and productive. And in that sense, also more, quote, successful than before when your life is just running a race and you're trying to outrun other people.
And talking about creativity, how do you think joy influences creativity? And
Mm.
how has it influenced your own creative process through the years?
Mm. Such great questions. Well, how joy influences creativity. Some people think that writers need to be depressed, intense, unhappy in order to write well. But that's one of those false, sort of romantic myths about writing and writers. And I think it's quite a dangerous one, actually. The research, in fact, shows that people are not creative when they're depressed. What a person needs in order to write, from an emotional perspective, is to be happy and calm and open. This has been my experience and the experience of many others. At the same time, creativity isn't only about mood or being in a certain frame of mind. There are people who think about creativity in that way, and I know it's incorrect. You know, they'll say things like, I'm just waiting to write or paint or compose music, whatever, until I'm in the mood, until inspiration strikes. But those of us who work creatively know that inspiration has a way of showing up when you're sitting at your desk working and it knows where it can find you. When I'm creative, I feel joy, but it's not just the emotion joy. It is the emotion joy, but it's also a state of joy. It's a flow state. And this is really unlike anything else. Now, as for how it's influenced my own creative process, well, I've sort of covered that, I think. I don't bother trying to write in a time of crisis or depression or the day after a close friend of mine dies. I just don't, I certainly may sit and write, but I don't expect that to be a creative time. I expect that to be a time maybe where I'm venting or comforting myself, but that's different than the creative process.
What advice would you give to aspiring writers?
Well, I think aspiring writers need to first of all understand that writing is work. And again, this flies in the face of the way many people think about writing, but it is work. It's joyful work, but it's work. It's not something that this aspiring writer is going to do. They won't succeed to return to success if they only do it when the mood strikes. They need to make the effort to create space in their lives for their writing, and they have to do it every day, or at least on a very regular, predictable basis. Um, I think it's easy, especially in our online world, to get caught up in the day to day demands of work and life and social media and shunt to the side our creative work while you're dealing with everything else. But the truly original work that each of us has in us and is capable of, whatever our field of endeavor, is our most important work and contribution. And it's what makes us feel most alive. And it's really sad how many people have told me that they have dreams of writing, but somehow that keeps getting pushed to the back burner. So what I'd say to them is that you have to have a routine. You have to make a commitment to create the time and space for it. And I think it really changes the work and your life overall. if you do creative work for even 1 hour each day, and I don't mean this just for writers, I mean it for everybody, whatever your field. Talking about sketch notes, another one from LinkedIn that I shared because I liked it so much was by this wonderful artist, Grant Snyder. The top half has a picture of a guy, and the text says basically, "There's never enough time for creative work." And the bottom half says, "There will never be a better time for creative work." And I think that's true. So if anyone's listening to this and has a creative project they dream of doing, but they've never gotten around to, I suggest they just start making the space and time for it, even if it's just 20 minutes a day, and then stick to it day after day.
Fantastic advice. Thank you. And beyond the amazing novels that you write, you're also among the top 25 female content creators on LinkedIn worldwide. What are the top three factors that you believe contributed to this achievement?
Well, I think my posts have probably struck a chord with people because what I share is about ideas and issues that really matter to me in an authentic way. The posts aren't about me. Facebook, I think, is much more me than LinkedIn, but still, many LinkedIn posts are just about me, the person who's writing them. My posts are about broader issues. I also use infographics or sketch notes every time by other people. I'm not creating them. And these are visually interesting and they draw people in. This may sound funny coming from a writer who just writes text. I'm not an artist. But I think combining the visual and the verbal is a very powerful combination. And from an educational point of view, they reinforce each other in a way that works very well on LinkedIn and social media in general.
If you could have any superpower that would allow you to achieve three wishes, what would your three wishes be?
Wow, this is a game we've been playing since childhood, the Three Wishes game. And of course, they've changed over and over constantly throughout my life and yours, everyone who plays this game. Well, I guess number one, given the current war especially, to bring peace to the Middle East and then the rest of the world. Number two, I'd like there to be safety for all children worldwide and life opportunities for them and food and clean water. I'm just horrified to think of children living in the conditions that so many children in our world live in. And I guess I would wish for an end to poverty, to political tyrants, and to the destruction of our physical planet. I think I've kind of snuck in. This wasn't just three, because each of them is a few of them, maybe. But anyway, these are things that I would like for my superpower three wishes.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And when you're looking indeed around all the key issues we have in this world, what do you believe we need to do collectively to bring more joy and harmony to our world?
Well, I see joy and harmony as related not only to internal states and orientations, but also to external social realities, including economics. You can't have poverty, starvation, intergroup violence, social inequality, and expect these people to feel joyful, or at the macro level to have peace and harmony within a given country or between two countries or multiple countries. So I think dealing with economic, political, and social problems and the emotional realities related to these, such as violence against women and children and hatred towards individuals or groups just because they're different from us in some way. Dealing with these things is really crucial if we want people to live lives that are mentally healthy, emotionally and spiritually satisfying, and even joyful, at least some of the time. I also think learning to live with uncertainty and nuance is very important, as is developing critical thinking and the ability to challenge truths that we're given and stereotypes. And all these kinds of capacities are significantly developed through reading fiction. Again, according to research, I'm not just claiming this. I would say, and of course, this isn't surprising coming from a writer, that if you want to help the world, read. Read good fiction. And I say this not to make money on books, but because reading has many benefits apart from the pleasure it brings. It reduces stress, improves mood, concentration, focus, and writing skills, and it increases creativity. But maybe most of all, it connects thinking and feeling, which leads to reflection, which leads to asking questions and considering major matters of life, including morals and ethics. And the research actually shows that people who don't read very much are more likely than people who read a lot to rely on others to tell them what to think, rather than deciding for themselves as independent, well informed citizens. And this sets the stage for authoritarianism, fascism, and so forth, which are opposites of democracy. So I think of books as being crucial and even having, to use your word, superpowers. I've mentioned that they actually, reading good fiction actually increases your empathy in real life. So I believe if every person on the planet read good fiction for just a half an hour a day, we'd be living in a different world. So, to answer your question, how to bring more joy and harmony, I would say read good fiction. And I actually believe this would help to heal our broken world and infuse it and everyone's lives with more harmony and more joy.
Wonderful. Nora, on these beautiful words, I thank you so much for your time today and look forward to continuing being in awe by your writing and your wisdom. Thank
Oh,
you.
this has been such a pleasure. And thank you. I'm inspired by your work too. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk about mine. So thank you.